Thanks a lot for joining in, Dr. Nina Kottler. We have the international speaker here on the first day of Radiology Imaging Summit of HeHealth. Dr. Nina Kottler was a MD/MS, Associate Chief Medical Officer of Clinical AI, VP Clinical Operations in Radiology, practicing radiologist for more than 15 years, has joined us now. And the topic which Dr. Kottler would be sharing to us today would be driving technology innovation in radiology practice. Once again, thanks a lot, Dr. Kottler, for coming in. You can start your presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'll get started. I do have one disclosure only because I'm going to be talking about the practice that I work in, and I am a partner in that practice in Partners Own Equity. So I hope today to discuss 6 lessons that I've personally learned working in a large private practice on how to drive technological innovation in healthcare, and we're doing it in radiology. And my practice is the largest radiology practice in the US. All right, let's get started. So lesson number 1. We've actually come to a point where we already have a mission in healthcare. We've had a call to action. We know that we can't continue doing the same things we've been doing. We can't afford it, and it's not producing good enough outcomes. So we've got what is called the quadruple aim, which is essentially driving value. That's outcomes and costs. So value is outcomes over cost for everyone in the healthcare spectrum. And we want to do that while improving the patient experience and improving the physician experience. So this is a mission that we all have in healthcare. And why is that important with innovation? Well, in innovation, if you're going to innovate, you need to innovate around a certain vision. And here's our vision right here. It's the quadruple aim. In my practice, we are a mission-driven culture, and our mission is to transform radiology. And this is a slide we literally show to everyone in our practice. We talk to practices that are going to join us. We talk to our physicians that are thinking about joining us. Why? Because we want everyone to align to the same mission. And that mission, again, for us is to transform radiology. And if you're going to innovate, we need people to innovate all in the same direction. We all need to be driving toward the same mission. So lesson number 1 is, if you're going to be innovating, you need to align around a singular mission. Why? Because innovation requires focus. There's no one person that's doing it alone, and you need that group of people to all be going in the same direction. Right, lesson number 2. Innovation is not free. You can't innovate as a side job. And this is something that I've experienced in radiology in the US. I mean, it wasn't very long ago when the average practice size for a radiology practice was 9 people. And when you have 9 people and you've got a whole list of things to do, well, the radiologists have to spend their time reading the cases on the list. And frankly, that's what we're paid for. So if you're going to be doing any innovation, you have to do it outside of that, kind of as a side job, and that doesn't work very well. When I joined Radiology Partners, I was the first radiologist to actually ever join, and the year after joining, we invested in a group that we called our Clinical Value Team, and that was an innovation team where we are paying radiologists part-time, so anywhere from 20 to 80% of their time, to work on figuring out, how do we drive value in healthcare? How do we innovate in this space? And it was myself, the CMO, and we had a director of clinical quality, and that was part of our job. Soon after that, we added 2 more radiologists, and those radiologists were leaders in different subspecialties of radiology, one in interventional radiology and one in pediatrics. And between that time and now, we have added 4 full-time analysts, 6 full-time data scientists, 2 full-time people that run operations for this team, and we work really closely with 4 different people from IT. So all of these people on this team, either part of our job or all of our job is to innovate. And you need to do that and be paid for it and given time to do that if you're going to be able to come up with anything innovative. Now, why did I start with clinicians? I started with the clinicians because clinical care and clinical needs need to drive technical innovation. It can't be the other way around. So we're starting to evolve that concept, although it seems like a lot of people. In early 2021, we're going to be adding 5 more national subspecialty divisions. These subspecialty divisions are all radiologists who are going to be providing input to our clinical value team, again, with more radiologists and other teammates. And at the end of this year, beginning of next year, we actually extended that to a larger innovation team. And this is our current structure at Radiology Partners. You don't need to read all the details on this, but I do want to point out that it is a cross-functional team. So we took people from clinical, we took people from our clinical value team, we took IT, but we also added operations across our practice, and we added people from strategy. All right, so lesson number 2, you need to invest in innovation. It's not free, and it has to be driven by clinical needs. Lesson number 3. So this is an ode to Sean Connery, who passed away last week, but I was always a big 007 James Bond fan when I was a kid. And why was it? It was kind of like he was a magician. He always was 1 or 2 steps in front of the bad guy. He always knew what to do. He could like figure out what people's passwords are. And I never understood, like, how is that possible? How do you do that? Well, the secret behind being this innovative person is that behind the scenes, and they weren't showing this in the movie, he was taking a lot of time to study. Really, the only way you can innovate is if you're putting in the dedicated hours to understand what you're learning about. And when I first started getting involved with artificial intelligence, that was not my background. I got involved in it because I was fascinated by it, and I started studying it because to me that was really interesting. And people would ask questions, and I'd be like, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to go find out about it. I read lots of articles. I read book pages about it. I got in touch with different vendors and I spoke to them frequently. I stayed in touch with people on social media and followed them to hear what they had to say. I mean, pretty much my nights and weekends I spent learning about artificial intelligence so that I could innovate in that area. And that's what allows you to do that. So lesson number 3, put in the time to study. And you're not going to do that. You're not going to want to do that on your nights and weekends unless it's an area that you enjoy. And I happen to love it, so I was very happy to put in the time in that area. Lesson number 4, innovation is not about inching out everyone else. It's not about being this plane right here on the picture where you're just a few inches in front of other people. It's about being this plane over here that's doing something completely different. And I learned a lot about how this happens through this fantastic book that I would encourage anyone to read. It's really my favorite leadership book that I've learned about. And it's called Your Brain at Work by David Rock. And he talks about something called insight. And how insight happens. It does not occur by using the frontal cortex of our brain where we're trying to think like one step ahead. What's the next little bit we can get out of it? It's something completely different. And I will tell you that I think insight is the key to innovation. So what is insight? If I told you, here are 4 words, crab, sauce, pie, and pine, what is the one concept that brings all of these 4 different terms together? You could start thinking about it and say, well, crab, that's a crustacean. Maybe it's an animal. Well, pie is not an animal. That doesn't work. Crab is something you eat, and pie, or could be something you eat, and pie is also something you can eat. Sauce is something you can eat. Oh, that works, but no, pine really isn't. When you're trying to think of it step by step, it's really hard to figure out what the one item is that's combining these. But when I show it to you and I say apple, you have a crab apple, you have a pineapple, applesauce, and apple pie. Apple is the one word that puts all of these things together. You kind of have that aha moment, like, oh yeah, of course, right? That aha moment is what happens with an insight. And you don't get that by trying to think logically about what is the next step. You need to actually take a little bit of time to reflect. And in his book, David Rock talks about this. This is why insights happen when we're, sleeping or just waking up or in the shower. It's because we're thinking about something that's a little bit different. We need to focus, but we need to focus in a little different way. So make time for reflection, because if you don't, you're not going to have insights. Insights come when you're taking a little bit of time for that reflection. I will say, in working in radiology and in a lot of places in healthcare, that we've got a lot of work to do. People tend not to take time to reflect. And when I've asked around in my practice with the leaders that I really respect, how much time do you think we should actually spend doing, and how much time should we spend reflecting? And they will tell you that only 80% of the time in general should you spend doing. You need 20% of the time to just sit back and reflect, so that you can have these insights, so you can think about the bigger picture. And if you don't, you're not taking advantage of all the things that's available to you. All right, lesson number 5. Radiology is a very big space. If you're just trying to say, I'm going to innovate in radiology, it's like trying to boil the ocean. It's just too big. If you want to think about it in a different way, it's a little bit easier if you break down radiology into its component sections. So one of the ways that I've thought about this, and I'm taking terminology from Kurt Langlotz, is if you break down the exam life cycle from the very moment that a referring clinician has a clinical question in mind, and 95% of the time they're going to order an exam. After they order exam, we have to schedule it and protocol it. We've got to acquire and reconstruct the images. We have to put those images onto a work list. Then when we open the case, we need all of the relevant patient information. We interpret the examination, report it, communicate the findings, and then make sure the patient has the appropriate follow-up if they need it. And then we, of course, as a group, should make sure that we're learning from any of our mistakes. It's a lot easier to think about the different segments of radiology when you want to innovate and just say, I'm going to innovate in radiology. Well, it's easier to think about, how do I innovate in improving the report? How do I innovate in the exam interpretation? So I would suggest that you try to break down whatever you're trying to innovate and think about it in its components. All of its components make up the whole, but it's easier to innovate in one of the segments. Okay, so lesson number 5. Break down the problem. Lesson number 6, and this is the last one. Humans are good at some things and computers are good at others. I've done a lot of work in artificial intelligence, and it's one of the core tenets that I think about when people said, oh, AI is going to replace radiologists. To me, that didn't make any sense. Every bit of evidence that I have seen shows that we're better together. So a human is good at certain things, a computer is good at other things. Neither one is better than the other, but you put them together and they're both better than the single entities. So what we should be looking at is creating a partnership between the technology and the humans, because together they're better than either one alone. So we, in our practice, created an artificial intelligence technology. It's called RecoMD, and it uses natural language processing to listen to the radiologist as they dictate. And when they're dictating, it's listening for certain findings, that it has a follow-up or a best practice recommendation that's taken from the literature. So if I dictated, there's a 4-centimeter abdominal aortic aneurysm, great, RecoMD would hear that, it would know that there is a best practice for that, and it would provide me with the appropriate follow-up in the reference that I could put directly into my report. We created RecoMD with a couple of core tenets in mind, and 2 of those tenets are really relevant for this talk, so I'm just going to go through them. First tenet is we wanted to create a system that worked with the radiologist. A lot of technology and technological, quote, innovation, it makes the human fit into the space that the IT technology is creating for it. And it doesn't really make sense. You should be doing it the other way around. So for example, instead of creating, if your practice wants, and your physicians, your referring clinicians want structured templates, well, yes, you could create a structured template and make every radiologist fit their structure into that template. That's one way of doing it, and that's a lot of the way that people do it in healthcare. But maybe a better way is to create and innovate in technology so that no matter how the radiologist is comfortable dictating, the technology then takes that dictation and puts it into a structured template. To me, technology should be fitting to the human system and not making the human fit to the technology. So core tenet number 2 was also to create a system that, that did things that humans are not good at. A lot of times what you see in technology are people create things just because the technology is available for them. So in AI at the beginning, a lot of the algorithms came out, well, they were all lung nodule detector algorithms. Why were they lung nodule detector algorithms? Because there were a lot of cases out there, a lot of free data that was available where you could train an algorithm on detecting lung nodules. I would suggest we should do it in a different way. Think about what humans are really not good at, and let's innovate technology in those realms. So 2 things I'll mention. 1, humans are really bad at initiating workflow. We don't remember to do things, and we're not good at it. So we should not be required to remember that. Technology is excellent at it. The second thing that we're not very good at is integrating information from multiple different sources. But it's quite interesting in healthcare, all of our information is siloed, and we tell the physician, go into those silos, and you as a physician should integrate the information. It really doesn't make any sense. We should be using technology to do those. All right, so lesson number 6, apply technology wisely. Concentrate on those things for which humans are not adept. So in summary, today we reviewed 6 lessons for technological innovation. Number 1, align around a mission. Everyone should be marching in the same direction if you want to innovate. Number 2, invest in innovation. That innovation should be driven by clinical needs and not the other way around. Number 3, you have to put in the time to study. It takes a lot of thought to be able to have these insights, and so invest time in doing that. Number 4, make time for reflection. It is the time when you're going to be having these insights, and insights lead to innovation. Number 5, break down the problem. It's too big to just solve one huge thing. Break it down into its different components and innovate in those different areas. And last but not least, apply technology wisely. Do the things that humans are not really adept, because what we want are the 2 to be working together collaboratively. With that, I'd like to say thank you, and I'll pass it back.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was very crucial, the 6 lessons which you had actually indicated. If I could quickly ask you a couple of questions, if you can take it up. You had given us nice, crisp 6 lessons, but I would like to ask you, what are the key 3 learnings that the radiologist, in particularly Asia or particularly in India, need to take when they have to, when they are we have this pandemic like COVID-19? What are the 3 key learnings or lessons that we should be taking in?
3 learning lessons about COVID-19, or 3 lessons in general about how we have to manage in a pandemic?
Not the on the COVID-19 in particular, if you could just help me out with that. Okay. Because there are a lot of questions from radiologists from Indian side also. If you give us key pointers, it would be nice.
Sure. So let's think. What have we learned about COVID-19? COVID-19 has changed how we practice right now, and how we function in different business entities. I mean, a lot of my job was flying around to different locations, giving talks in different places, and working with people directly face to face. And this entire year, every single conference I've been at has been remote. And there's good and bad about that. I think one of the things we're realizing is that we can use technology in order to communicate better, and we don't need to be flying everywhere and spending all of that time doing that. We can communicate through this kind of technology just like we are today, and it works pretty well. And there's been a lot more innovation that's occurred in this space because of it. So I think that is one important lesson. We've seen that also in teleradiology. Teleradiology and telemedicine in general was not something that was used significantly. Well, teleradiology was, I'll say telemedicine was not something that was used significantly prior to COVID. But after and during COVID, we've recognized that we can still see patients remotely, and we can apply the same technology we've been using in teleradiology to other kinds of telehealth, whether that's mental health or primary care health. And still see the patient, be able to speak with the patient, but maybe not always be in the same room. And I think that's something that's going to continue even after this pandemic ends. The other thing that I think has been a big lesson learned is humans in general, we're social. We're a social being. And it is very difficult for people to be socially distanced, not actually seeing people, not interacting in the way we were able to do before. There were months, I mean, where I was just locked in my house and I didn't really see anyone. And I think that that causes a lot of depression and difficulty, and that needs to be recognized. We need to recognize that we as humans are still social beings, and you need to make time for that connection. So having the Zoom calls, making time to speak with family members that may be in a different location. I think all of those things are important, and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves. So I know that I personally had to do a lot more things like meditate and go for a run and take time to take care for myself, because I know that everyone's just in a heightened state and things are more difficult naturally.
Okay. So also I need to one last question. The best advice to succeed in this ever more challenging radiologist world, like the radiologists always think, have we rightly diagnosed? Is it correct? Is it perfect? So what kind of best advice to in this ever more challenging radiologist world? If you can just that.
It is getting more and more challenging. I mean, we're having more and more data that are being thrown at us all the time. Our exams used to be, smaller. Now they're all bigger, and we have way more of them, and we're getting interrupted, and we've got more things to do. And with more technology, it brings a lot more that we have to manage. I think we should be taking lessons from the past, and I think about that a lot. The reason why I went into radiology was because when I was a medical student, there wasn't any PACS. We didn't have the technology. Everything was film, and it was hanging on a light board. And our dictations, because they went to transcriptionists, didn't come out for days. And what did that mean? That meant that every single specialty rotated through the radiology department before they started in the morning. And it was a fantastic experience. It was a place where a lot of collaboration occurred. And as technology has come in and PACS has come in with voice recognition, we don't see that happening anymore. And I think it's a loss. I think that we lose a lot of the information because we're trying to capture it in an HL7 segment. And so the history I get is not that robust history that when I was speaking with a referring clinician and they were all rotating through the department, and we'd be talking back and forth about the patient and what to do, and questions would be asked and answered. You don't get that in a little segment that has to be 30 characters long. So I would say, let's look back to the past. We're not going to be able to go back to the past and force people to come down to the reading room, but let's use technology to create that capability where we can do it again.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Neena Kottler. Thanks for the time and thanks for the great presentation. It was really nice having you in this summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.